you're watching BloombergQuint. The slowing economy and strain on government finances has left Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government in a dilemma. Doing nothing at a time when investment and consumption are weak is not an option. But higher spending and a wider fiscal deficit could raise borrowing costs for businesses and have a crowding out effect. So what should the government do? Or let me put it this way. What does industry and business hope the government will do? I'm joined today by veteran industrialist and CII President Vikram Kirloskar. Mr. Kirloskar, thanks very much for speaking to us here on BloombergQuint. I'm going to start first by asking you for your assessment of the state of the economy, whether you think we're anywhere close to bottoming out, given the recent data that we've seen, and whether you're seeing green shoots in any sectors across the economy.
Well, I think the industry is definitely facing headwinds. The whole economy is facing headwinds. Amongst industries, there are some industries facing more headwinds than others, and some which are doing better than the others. When you talk of green shoots, I'm not really sure. I saw that in today's papers. I don't know who wrote about the green shoots, but I'd certainly like to ask the person who wrote about it, what did he see? That's whether we have bottomed out. I think it's hard to say, but it has been a long stretch of depressed revenue and depressed demand.
And in your assessment, Mr. Kirloskar, because you have a bird's eye view of many industries as the president of this business chamber, in your assessment, at this point in time, there doesn't look like there will be any comeback in either consumption or even the investment cycle.
No, I think there will be a comeback. It may not be in the next 2 months or 3 months. Like I was telling someone, it's easy to make a 5-year plan right now, but making a 3-month plan or a 6-month plan is very, very difficult to say what exactly will happen. We have asked from CII, we've been talking with the government, and we have put a whole lot of suggestions, but the major ones, which we talked with the finance minister in her consultation meetings yesterday, was please think of, relook at the goalpost on the budget deficit. Look at expansion in your policy and perhaps government to start spending more. Expecting private sector to spend more at this stage when capacity availability in the market is quite large. With a lot of manufacturers, they have excess capacity. No one will invest unless capacities get filled up. So I think this is a time where government can spend more in infrastructure, and we let go of the budget deficit issues for maybe a year or two before we start pulling it down again.
But Mr. Kirloskar, it never is as simple as it sounds. And whilst I understand that your call is for a relaxation in the fiscal deficit at a time when the economy maybe needs that kind of stimulus, the corollary to that is that any such relaxation in the fiscal deficit will also have a negative impact on businesses like yours, because we've seen lending rates continue to remain high. The transmission of the RBI rate cuts hasn't happened as yet completely when it comes to corporate borrowing. So I'm just curious as to how you think that will square. How will that help pull up the economy in a big way? You're hoping that any extra spends on infrastructure will eventually have that disproportionate an impact on consumption?
No, there is going to be some effect definitely on inflation and interest rates. But I think interest rates, not all of it has been fully passed on. So perhaps not all of the rise will also get fully passed on. That's what I hope. But in the past also, if you look at it, we've had higher interest rates and higher inflation, where we've had significantly higher growth. I think it's something we'll have to go through. Right now, what is the other solution? What is your alternative to say, let's increase demand? Let's spur up demand, let's spur up sentiment. We need to figure out how to get some money back in the economy, encourage people to spend more to get this thing going. Somewhere we'll have to take a hard decision like this.
Do you think, Mr. Kirloskar, that the decision of the government to reduce corporate tax rates, while in itself a good decision, was maybe the wrong solution at this point of the problem? And instead, that giveaway on tax revenue should have come maybe through consumption-oriented schemes. For instance, maybe a lower GST rate, or things like that, which could have helped have a more immediate short to medium-term impact versus a lower corporate tax rate, which is definitely a good move, but a more longer-term impact.
This corporate tax move is definitely a longer term impact. I think there were a lot of projects where India was competing against Southeast Asia, probably for many companies, I know for a fact, where India was out of the running. And this has certainly brought India back to the table as a location for further investment. I think you'll see results of the corporate tax reduction in the next 12 to 18 months. You'll start seeing results of that. Also, with the stress on the economy and people's profits coming down, I mean, I don't think this reduction in tax, I think it's helping people a little bit to maintain their PATs. That will certainly help them in the sentiment that is there within each company. I think the corporate tax was at the right time.
Okay, so you don't believe
it showed that the government was willing to listen and move ahead.
All right, but I think in a given year, asking for both a corporate tax rate giveaway and then any other sort of stimulus measure might be asking the government for a bit much. My second point that I wanted to raise with regards to the government's response is...
No, we are not asking for any other tax. We have not asked for personal taxes right now. And in some of my statements, I've said that, there are other more important issues. First, look at how to increase demand. What are the ways we can do to increase demand, improve liquidity in the system. The only other tax area we've talked about is look at how to make equity as a more competitive instrument compared to debt. So look at the entire taxation on equity, whether it's capital gains, dividend tax, or fees in between in transactional taxes. Have a look at that whole thing. We haven't made a single number suggestion, but we've only suggested that they look at the whole gamut of taxation around equity to make it more attractive.
So it is not industry's contention that maybe lower GST rates might be actually more helpful than, let's say, a stimulus push in the infrastructure sector, which might take a much longer lag effect to benefit the economy as opposed to an immediate consumption impact by virtue of lower GST rates? Have you all weighed the consequences of those two?
Listen, we have to be a little realistic in the whole situation as well.
Okay.
When we make a demand, I think it's better to be a little more realistic. If we say reduce GST, certainly the states are not going to agree for it. If you look at the situation currently today on GST collection, I think everyone is trying to see how to increase the GST collection. So we feel regarding GST that better rationalize the GST rates, try to figure out, get more people in the GST net, use technology, use data analysis, try to broaden the GST net by flattening the rates or making less variety of rates. Make the whole system simpler. Rather than saying reduce GST, no state is going to agree to it.
Well, the states have been guaranteed a certain amount of revenue, so it becomes then incumbent on the center to borrow and pay the states what they've been guaranteed, which is the 14% plus on a certain base year. So whether the center borrows additional to invest in infrastructure or the center borrows additional to compensate states for a shortfall in GST revenue, eventually it's all borrowing. We can argue about the consequences of building, capital assets like infrastructure versus boosting consumption, but this is the time lag effect issue that I was talking about. You seem to be suggesting to me that the one critical area where the CII's efforts are focused are to do with maybe boosting infrastructure. There is a lag time to that, and that connects into my next question. While the government has been responsive to the many issues that industry and business, big and small, have raised over the last 6 months with regards to the economy, many of the measures are taking much time. For instance, this real estate rescue fund that was first announced in September and then endorsed by cabinet last month, is still in the process of getting underway with deals yet having to be done. Several other issues, for instance, money stuck in arbitration for large infrastructure projects. Whilst we've had several promises from the government on that money being released, it's not yet fully clear from companies whether the money has started coming in. So whilst the government is responsive, do you believe that the time lag effect of some of these measures is drawing out this slowdown and creating more pain?
The kind of system we have with our own checks and balances, I think they're going pretty fast. It can't be like a private company where the CEO decides something and next day something will happen. I think there's a process the government of India has to go through. And I think they're doing it as fast as reasonably possible. One can argue that you need more to be done, less to be done. It's difficult. You tell me, we've been talking with many economists and many other people who understand the economy better than I do. And everyone has a different opinion, slightly different opinion. The government also has to do a certain amount of consultative process to come to a decision. And I think they're trying very hard to do it. We want to support the government, okay? We want to support whichever government is there, because we are both facing headwinds together. It's not that, there are issues with the economy, there are issues on how to get out of this. One of the ways we feel is we have to spend our way out of it. And that's what we are suggesting to the government right now. This is one of the suggestions which has come after discussions internally. Of course, we have issues with NBFCs, liquidity, payments. There are many other issues also going, but the big thing is how do you push demand? GST reduction is on one side, on the supply side of it, or the reducing the cost. The other is money in hand, which is being spent for various projects, which will probably take some time, take a longer time, as you say, to go down. One creates an asset as well. Both can create an asset over a long run. But we just felt that asking for a GST reduction, although it's the obvious thing, is we can keep asking. It will take a longer time before that happens.
So may I ask Mr. Kirloskar, what was the government's response to your request? Did they seem inclined to consider a relaxation on the fiscal deficit side and therefore, as you point out, spend your way out of this crisis?
Let me say that in our meeting yesterday, which was with associations, I was in a meeting with various other associations. I would say they paid a lot of attention to whatever I said, the other associations said, and they listened to everyone very carefully. I don't think anything was said, no, we can't do this or we can do this, nothing. They did not give any comment, but they did listen carefully, and they asked questions regarding our views. I think they also realized that we are facing headwinds together. They know that. And I think they're also looking for a solution. I don't think it's not an easy solution to find. Please understand, it's not like you could make a big long-term mistake also in taking a decision which we may suggest. We don't know. I think they're taking the right approach in consulting everyone. We've seen the ministry react in the last few months on various issues that have come up fairly fast. So we are hopeful that they will continue listening to us, and they showed that intent and come up with something positive.
Mr. Kirloskar, much has been said currently also about, and I'm moving away now from just central economy issues to the relationship between business and government, and I'm going to examine that on two quick aspects. One is the issue of maybe too much legislative change and over-regulation. There has been this constant refrain that over the last 3-4 years, we have seen so many new laws being enacted or earlier laws being amended. For instance, the Companies Act, which has now been amended, I think, at least 3 times with repeated changes in rules, and that it's becoming almost impossible for business to keep up, and that this goes against the grain of the Prime Minister's philosophy of employing or deploying ease of doing business measures in the economy. Would you say we are right now an over-legislated, over-regulated economy?
To get over this situation, we need to build trust, more trust between government and business, and business and society. This is important. It's easier said than done. If you look at the kind of issues that are having with banks and haircuts and NPAs and all these other issues you read in the papers every day, it requires two people to clap hands, to make this situation improve. So what we requested the government is that when you look at business, there are people who are not going exactly as per the law. You please punish them with the full effort of the law, whatever effect of the law. But the rest of the people, majority of people are doing business properly. Please don't make the law difficult for the people who are doing business properly. We've requested that. I think they have understood that, and I hope to see some effects of that in the coming year.
Mr. Kirloskar, I would be remiss on my part not to ask you then whether a broader section of industry actually does agree with what Rahul Bajaj expressed at a corporate event several weeks or days ago when he suggested that there was not enough freedom for industry to speak its mind in front of the government, and therefore that was cramping industry's style or their ability to communicate with the government urgent issues. The sense of fear pervading business. Do you subscribe to Mr. Bajaj's views, sir?
So, well, I had meetings. I've been sitting in Delhi and having meetings. Everyone has their own views, but the approach that we have taken from here, from CII, is that we are, whatever issues that are there, we tell the government directly based on facts or data that we have, which we have been doing so. But we try to work with government on a cooperative basis, because it's not a government facing a problem alone or industry facing a problem alone. We are jointly facing a problem, and we have to jointly solve the problem. And when I've taken that attitude, I have not found a problem in saying anything based on facts, based on what our situation is directly to the government. I've been talking with the government like that last few days in Delhi. I've been in Delhi, and I haven't felt afraid of saying anything right now, frankly.
Mr. Kirloskar, just before our critical meeting with regards to the trade treaty of RCEP, you had in fact issued a note, fairly explicitly supporting India's participation in the Regional Cooperative Economic Program. And I'm just curious to know whether you were disappointed that India did not in fact participate as fully as one would have expected, and is still holding back from being a part of RCEP, which I think both CII and your note were explicitly in favor of.
Yeah. We are in favor of FTAs basically, provided all of the Indian issues are well protected. Therefore, services have to be fully included. That's a part of the industry in India. No non-trade, non-tariff barriers should be there, as well as rules of origin are clear. I think in RCEP, these three items were not clear, and they were not of any advantage, or they were in fact of a disadvantage to India. So I think the government took an appropriate decision in not signing RCEP. But I still believe they should pursue it and make sure that we try our best to get what we require in RCEP. Same thing, any FTA with Europe or FTA with USA, please try to do it, but protect India's interests and do it. We should not be at a disadvantage. The markets of China or markets of Europe and USA are huge. We need them, we need to access them, we need to be able to sell there, but it can't be, it has to be on an equal footing as well. It has to be there can't be non-tariff barriers. Rules of origin have to be very clear in any kind of treaty like this. And I think there were issues on these points, and therefore the RCEP was not signed. Yes, I was slightly disappointed RCEP was signed. I would have preferred something like RCEP in the long run. But I'm happy that the government was firm on all these specific items which they objected to, and therefore did not sign it.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one final question that goes back to the very first point that you made in the beginning of our conversation, which is that the CII ask to the government is to spend more on infrastructure as an effort to spend ourselves or our way out of this crisis. I just want to know how you think that squares with recent commentary we've seen, let's say, come in from the PMO with regards to the projects undertaken by the NHAI. In fact, if I remember that letter very clearly, it suggested that the NHAI had in fact become too ambitious and was running up, several large projects for which it needed more and more funding as opposed to monetizing some of its assets at this point in time. So how confident are you that your request for an additional spend on infrastructure is something that can actually not just be agreed to by government on a fiscal basis, but also implemented in any substantive or efficient fashion?
See, it's not easy to, the headwind we are facing, it's very easy to build up supply, on the supply side, to build up capacity. It's a matter of investing in a factory and building it up. But trying to create demand, getting people to spend money to buy something is very, very difficult. For that you need, it's not just the money, you need sentiment, you need confidence that my future growth is good, my future salaries are going to be good. It's a whole lot of things. It's not as simple as building a new factory. This is one of the suggestions we have made, okay? We have said, don't get, relook at the goalposts on the budget deficit, perhaps extend them, and be a little more flexible in whether it's infrastructure spending. We've also said any other programs, especially in the rural sector, can you please front-end them rather than spread them over the year. So we've asked for suggestions like that. How fast they will work, how is it possible that they'll be done immediately in 2 months, 3 months? It's difficult to say. But what alternatives do we have right now? If you have a better alternative, then we'd like to hear it, and we'd like to talk with you and go back to the government with that.
Well, thank you very much for that invitation, Mr. Kirloskar. My job is to ask questions. I'll leave it there. I think you've made it clear what the CII position is, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.